question 4, which is, do you support paid parking downtown or at the beach? Why or why not? And we'll start with Ms. Bellinger.
I absolutely do not support paid parking anywhere, whether it's downtown or at the beach. And the reasons being, we need to encourage people to come to town. We do not need to discourage them. And paid parking downtown will stop people from going downtown. And businesses are hurting at the moment, and the last thing you want to do is deter people from going down there. At the beaches, I can't agree with that, because they don't need to park in Main Beach at the parking lot or any of the other parking areas. If it's paid, they can just pull up by the dunes, park around by the dunes on North Fletcher or on Ocean Avenue, and that will end up being catastrophic when people start crossing over those dunes.
Thank you, Ms. Bellinger. Mayor Speaker.
Sarasota put in paid parking in its downtown, and 3 months later they removed the kiosks that they paid a lot of money for. I think that's a good reason why we don't need paid parking downtown. I've been opposed to paid parking at the beach from the get-go. I don't see how it'll work. It will be difficult for businesses, even for us citizens who want to just jog down to the beach. You'll have to get a permit every year, even though you won't have to pay for it. So I'm opposed to it.
Thank you. Mr. Corbett.
Well, we started out with paid parking downtown, then we went to kiosks, then they wanted to do parking passes. Now they want to do parking on the beach. It's all about revenue with this city. It's all about bringing revenue in. And, who knows whether we'll hear about this again. Right now they have the parking at the beach up, so we'll see what happens when that actually comes up for a vote. And then we'll also see whether we get parking again. So anyway, I am not for parking. All they will do is drive tourists off. They'll go down to the county beaches, and we'll end up with less revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Corbett. Commissioner Childers.
What is driving this what's driving this decision or this investigation is the $200,000 a year we spend cleaning up the beaches, paying for the lifeguards, and a $700,000 price tag that we've got coming for beach renourishment. We're looking for a way to have some of our visitors share that expense. There are many, many problems with the proposal as I have seen it so far. They are still investigating it. I do not have enough information to make a decision one way or the other. I have found another $500,000 that we can use and avoid the paid parking issue if we can dedicate some money to take care of that beach renourishment project. So I'm looking for ways to avoid it.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Childers. Mr. Elwell.
Well, I'm dead against it. I think it's another revenue grab by the city instead of looking at the expenditure side of the tab. You can't keep looking at revenue without looking at the other side. You can't keep dragging in more revenue. This would be a terrible thing to do to tourists. It would drive people away from our beaches. It would drive people away from our island instead of bringing them here. So I'm dead against it.
Thank you, sir. Okay, next question. We'll start with, since we got a little bit out of line here, we'll start with Mayor Steger. In light of recent state law, what is your position on short-term resort rentals in residential zones R1 and R2? Did that come out clear to everybody?
Right, the short-term rental issue, certainly it got much more complicated when the state got involved and said if you make any change to your short-term rental ordinance, you will not be able to have a short-term rental ordinance, which means that if we change the beach a little, and there are probably some areas where we could have expanded the short-term rental, we would have short-term rentals all over the city. So I'm opposed to that. I don't feel that it would be good for our city and our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Mr. Steer. Mr. Corbin. Excuse me, can I interject something real quick? For those of you who are not using the mic and you're moving it back and forth, there's a little switch right at the top. If you switch it off, they won't get that feedback in there if you're passing it from one person to the other. Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Go right ahead.
No, that's all right. I think we have the short-term rentals. The laws are on the book, or the codes, and they haven't been enforced. I believe right now they're in the process of making up some the codes and ordinances to enforce that, and they should probably be enforced. And then that would hopefully, if they're enforced, they would take away any problems that we have.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Childers.
I believe it's basic property rights. You should have the right to rent your home short term. I don't believe there's a difference between long-term and short-term rentals. A bad neighbor's a bad neighbor, whether he owns the property, rents the property for a year, or he's there for 2 weeks. I disagree with the mayor in that we'll have resort rentals all over the city. Until 2000, there was no restriction for short-term rentals in Fernandina Beach. None. And we didn't have them all over the city. It won't happen again.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Elwell.
I believe that personal property is sacred, and I think you should be able to rent your property for a week or 2 weeks or 6 months or a year. You need to be responsible for who you rent them to. You need to be accountable, and if your renters are breaking the law or violating the codes, then you are responsible for their behavior. And I do think the codes need to be enforced, and I do believe that the fines need to be adequate enough to make them enforceable, to make the people obey them. But I do believe that people have the right to rent their own property.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Paul.
Again, this is a hot button issue, primarily because as this came up before the City Commission, it was right about the time the state law was changing. And the mayor is correct. It would have meant that all over the city, everywhere would have to comply with being short-term rental. I don't agree with the short-term rental the way it is, because there are no codes being enforced. The police have no way of responding, and my understanding is that the owners of the property are supposed to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to be called, and people have had issues where they haven't been able to get hold of the property owners. Therefore, you have parties, who knows what going on. Oh, wow, that was quick.
Thank you, Ms. Milligan.